Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in again. This is, of course, Kyle Nash, the student of the game here with the Duval Dive, bringing you here all things Jacksonville Jaguar. We got a heck of an offseason we've been talking about here. Of course, special shouts as always to my good friends at the Fans First Sports Network, as well as to my co-host for our normal Wednesday episode, Travis D. Hobbs of Big Cat Country. But listen, let me get into it right here. And this was one we're going to have another month to talk about draft and things that are moving. We've given you a lot of action in free agency. If you haven't checked out any of that content, do yourself a favor, get a hold of your life. Check all of that out on the Duval Dive YouTube channel and or podcast. Like and subscribe to both. We can definitely get you what you need for all of that. A lot of good conversation there. But something Travis and I kind of tripped over in passing in these off-season talks was the fact that it took an awful lot to push Jacksonville Jaguar owner Shad Khan to the place to do the front office reboot. And just for a lot of things, a lot of dominoes had to fall into place, including having a 4-13 season. And it got me to wondering, as much as I've talked about there being 10 games, 10 losses in particular, 13 games total, right? The Jags are 3-10 in games within a single score. Now, the rest are significant blowouts, talking about the likes of battling, the Detroit Lions, for example, that completely just opened up an entire can and proved why they were a Super Bowl contending team before the injuries. But what led me to further analyze was that Trevor Lawrence missed 7 of the last 8 games. Certainly a contributing factor in that 4-13 record that set things down the line. So my little lizard brain started rotating. Of those 10 losses that I mentioned by a single score, Trevor Lawrence played in 6 of them, started one of them, of course. That was against the Houston Texans on December 1st, where, listen, we all know the moment that lived in infamy, where Azeez Al-Shaair had a close encounter with him with a dirty hit. Yeah, I'm sorry. Say what you will. I know people want to be all like, Kyle, Trevor slid late. No, he didn't. Stop it. Azeez Al-Shaair is a repeat offender, all that. I talk about that at length, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not what we're here to focus on. Regardless how you feel about that hit, that was the hit that eventually put him on IR and had him out essentially for the rest of the year. From that moment on, Mac Jones was starting games, including that we could call it defensive battle with the Vikings, but the 12-7 juggernaut of a battle, one of the Vikings' 14 wins on the year. But that moment on, the rest of the games, sure, the Tennessee Titans happened, and that was 2 of the Jags win, but the rest of them, those are the rest of the 5 games that kind of closed out the season with that 1-point advantage. And I've always wondered, if Trevor Lawrence was healthy and finished the season starting, I don't think it's beyond measure that he ends up leading the Jags to beat the Jets, Raiders, and the Colts. And you see on my little chart here that he overcomes that single-point deficit, or at least keeps the ball on offense for a squad long enough to where the defense might make a difference, right? Depending on the game we're talking about, to where the Jags win the final 5 games rather than go 2-5 in those final games and flip the Jets, Raiders, and Colts to a win. Well, why bother bringing this up? Who cares? Well, the reason why I bring it up is those essential pieces. If that occurs, if Trevor Lawrence had actually started those games and made that turnaround happen, we're talking about a 7-win Jacksonville Jaguar team. Sure, they don't make the playoffs, but a lot of things change significantly. For one, a 7-win team in that scenario, I mentioned too that they end up beating the Colts in week 18 to close out the season. What that means is they swept the rest of the AFC South essentially in this event, which puts them second in the division overall via tiebreakers, right? If that result takes place, then suddenly with the rest of the one-score games that could have been, whether you want to nitpick Miami, whether the fact that they could have and arguably should have beaten the now world champion Philadelphia Eagles, or either of the Houston games, right? Someone out there in the Duval devout would have said, gosh, if we split with the Texans, which was reasonable because both games were within a score, and both games were games that the Jags handed to the Texans, let's be honest, even despite Al-Shair's hit in the second game, the Jags still had a shot to finish it with a dub, right? And one of the other one-score games, if both those go the Jags' way, suddenly they're winning the AFC South. And that's the conversation that's being had. Suddenly, Shad Khan's in a place where Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke took this squad that was the best ever assembled and fell just short despite the numerous injuries that took place, right? Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Tyson Campbell, a number of people on the defensive backfield. All of this without a premier defensive tackle or even a serviceable one that stayed on the field regularly with Ryan Nielsen's rotational stuff and any real skill threat. Let's not forget the Packer game towards the end where they had a shot to win that with just Parker Washington, Brandon Strange, and Luke Farrell. And who was the other tight end? Or who was the other receiver? I guess it was BTJ. Yeah. So with those four guys at the skill positions, they're having to run an ace formation because all the other receivers are hurt. And they still had a shot to win the dang game. It was the defense that blew it, right? With all that going on, it's hard for me to believe that Shad Khan gets rid of Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke. What made that happen and go to where everything was bad as it was Trevor Lawrence getting hurt. Also, if Trevor doesn't get hurt, and all of those things I said transpire, they're a team that is this close to winning the AFC South as a 7-win team. They don't have the 5th overall pick anymore. All you Travis Hunters out there hoping and praying that he falls all the way down to 5 so that he could come to Jacksonville and do a whole lot of cool stuff, which, I mean, I'm not mad at you Travis Hunters out there for thinking of that, but I can guarantee you if Trevor Lawrence were still playing just in time for Christmas, he would have given you the gift of dashed hopes for Travis Hunter. And as it stands on top of that, if the finish that I propose led to a closing 5-game win streak, not only does that make Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke look better than certainly a lot of us think they are, it puts the Jags in a position to where they're outside the top 10. They dropped the Jets lower. They dropped the Raiders, or I should say higher in the order, lower in the placing, right? But they give the pick ahead of them even higher to the Colts, to the Jets, and the Raiders, while also falling in beyond the range of the Bears and even the Cowboys, depending on how the tiebreak goes. So they're picking outside of the top 10 now. They're in a position where the rebuild they'd still would have liked to do, or I should say rather the retool they'd still like to do is miles more difficult. So if Trevor Lawrence stays healthy last year after the hit from Azeez Al-Shair, Trent Baalke and Doug Peterson are still in the room. You have a lower overall pick, and the focus on the offensive line isn't as great. Now, I get it. The fact that Mitch Morse and Brandon Scherff are both going to be elsewhere. Of course, Morse retiring, Scherff becoming a free agent. I don't think he's going to get renewed. I'm pretty sure Travis D. Holmes also agrees with that. But we saw what this fix for the O-line was supposed to be in 2024. They thought it was Javon Foster in the 4th round and bringing in Mitch Morse would save everything. We've seen this group concentrate more on the skill positions than they would the O-line. Now, granted, those 2 losses, losing 2 starters compels more attention. They probably would have done more, the proverbial Baalke and Peterson, were they still here, to account for the offensive line because those 2 things happen. But at day's end, it wouldn't been enough. I'm not confident that though that pair does the same as the triumvirate of Executive Vice President Tony Pacelli, new General Manager James Gladstone, and new head coach Liam Cohen did in getting 3 offensive linemen before the month of April has even come, let alone the draft at the end of the same aforementioned April, right? I don't think any of that happens. Why? Because they'll be concentrating on how to replace Christian Kirk, and they'd be working on trying to expand skill players. I think by now, in a bulky regime, it's more likely that they definitely part with Christian Kirk has happened. I think that part's consistent, but I think they concentrate more on replacing Gabe Davis and augmenting their receiver core. It's probably likely that they try to go wide receiver early or something like that. Who knows? Maybe if they're at that, outside of 10th pick and Ashton Genty falls down that low, they get him there at that, top 11, top 12 spot. The alteration of so many things are taking place if Trevor Lawrence stays healthy. Instead, this new front office has taken the good with the bad and made significant changes to pivot in a new direction, which may not have been possible because Shad Khan, with a 7-win team, as close to winning the AFC South as they were, with all the injuries that they sustained, with all still, if I take those 3 back, there's still 7 losses within the entire year by 1 score. You expect me to believe Shad Khan doesn't believe his group then, as loyal as he was to Trent Baalke, you really expect me to believe he wouldn't think they could still turn it around? I'm not there. But just some food for thought for how we got here and why what happened needed to happen. And who knows? Maybe all you out there in the Duval devout, despite a dirty hit, will be sending Azeez Al-Shaair Christmas card. Well, okay, I wouldn't send him Christmas cards. That's offensive. Don't do that. But we're sending him thank you cards at the end of the day for what he did for your franchise, all by hitting Trevor Lawrence dirty. A very fascinating thing to think about. So, I'm Kyle Nash, the student of the game of Fans First Sports Network. Make sure you check out the Duval Dive, as well as my work with the Night Shift podcast, covering all things UCF. Of course, I also write for Fans First with the Orlando Magic. They beat Cleveland? What just happened? I don't know. We'll get into that on a different scale in a different place. But also special thanks to my personal champion, Travis D. Holmes. You'll see him with me on Wednesday night as we're trying to perfect a way to do a live mock draft for y'all to celebrate or make fun of, depending on what you think of the moves we make. So make sure you look out for all of that on the upcoming Duval Dive. Of course, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at the SOTG. And also find me on Facebook as the Student of the Game. And like and subscribe and do all the things. Also, make sure you head to Fans First Sports Network and check out the companion article with this podcast, where I go into a bit more depth, and you could see how ridiculous or fascinating my pondering of what could have been was here in this particular episode. So until next time, my friends, an honor, joy, and privilege. But until Wednesday, class dismissed.